The Philadelphia Eagles had a pretty damn good joint practice today against the Indianapolis Colts. We're going to recap that on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, talk some Anthony Richardson, Jalen Hurts comparisons. Plus, I think this rookie class might be extremely different. That's all coming up on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Eagles, your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers for making us your first listen Monday through Friday right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. And today's edition of the show is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed on GameTime. Gino, what a day for the Birds when it comes to their joint practice with former offensive coordinator Shane Steichen, who's running the Indianapolis Colts, rookie quarterback Anthony Richardson. A lot of drama going on with the Colts right now. Jonathan Taylor is seeking a trade, and it looked like on the field the Eagles were the way better team, better prepared, and it was the same guys that have been dominating all summer on both sides of the ball, but it sounded like it was a fun practice with some huge plays through the air, some big-time hits, and a couple of giant fights by guys that really you wouldn't be surprised were involved.
It's kind of funny because the other day I was watching the Colts preseason game, and it was the Colts broadcast. They're at home, and Jim Irsay comes in the booth, and the home broadcasters are talking about, oh, do you think this roster is ready to compete? And now you look at it, and this is why the Eagles are the Eagles, and this is why the Colts are a team like the Colts. And Irsay said, yeah, we're ready to roll. But, man, there's a difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. And since that first Browns practice, Lou, where they kind of didn't come out with the best energy, it wasn't the greatest day of practice, they've turned around like a boxer who got punched in the face, won that next round against the Browns wholeheartedly, and then today – they come out and deliver a TKO punch in what might be the three biggest days of this preseason, right? Because this is when Jalen Hurts, AJ, DeVonta, Dallas, all the starters on defense, that's when they're going against the ones. We haven't seen it for a single snap in the preseason. Yep. So to hear reports like we did today and to hear Kenny G come out and say after practice that we whooped their ass, man, that's the mentality you want to end the preseason with. This game on Thursday, you get those guys at the bottom half of the roster, their last chance to shine. But what a way for the ones to go out into the regular season, Lou. I think they're roaring and ready to go, and they want to be on the field like those 2s, 3s, and 4s are.
And again, I don't think Nick Sirianni was going to play these guys in the preseason, even if they weren't this good in joint practices. But it's another reason for them to feel comfortable saying they're not going to be rusty. We don't need to play them in these games. Like the Bills are playing Josh Allen. The Chiefs are playing Patrick Mahomes. Right. The Eagles are like, we don't need to play these guys out there because part of it, they're dominating these joint practices against Cleveland, against Indianapolis today. Another day where, again, Gino, we said it on the show last time, we're running out of ways to say Jalen Hurts, DeVonta Smith, and A.J. Brown dominated. I mean, seeing some of those touchdowns and one-on-ones from A.J., DeVonta had 2 huge 40-yard gains, 2 incredible contested catch plays. I mean, it's just so good. These three, honestly, they're going to go down as the best passing trio in Eagles history, and I don't think it's going to be even close.
As good as they were today, Jalen Hurts came out of practice and he said he was a little frustrated that it ended early. You see how eager he is to just want every opportunity to compete. And that's the mentality, man. I love that. When we were in the Carson Wentz, Nick Foles days, it seemed like Carson never wanted to compete with this guy. He just wanted to be handed this job, right? And even the best guys are going out there. Yeah, AJ and DeVonta could probably get by going through the motions, but they're not just going through the motions. They're doing it at the highest of high levels. And Jalen Hurts, the same thing. And it seems that every time they have a joint practice, somebody comes out from the other team saying, yeah, this guy's going to have a big season. And I'm sure you're going to hear that from Shane Steichen, who obviously was his offensive coordinator last year. And I'm sure you'll probably hear that from guys like Anthony Richardson, who we'll talk about. And I'm sure they've been compared. Yep. And this formula that the Eagles have taken, Lou, it started years ago with the idea of bringing in weapons for a young quarterback, but it's kind of evolved to where other teams are trying to do exactly what Phillies do. Look at Indianapolis. They're just a younger, less talented version than Philadelphia.
Gino, I'm starting to think it's the most important. Removing line play, right? I think the most important thing for a football team to sustain long-term success and to sustain long-term elite quarterback play is by having this a young trio or maybe even just a duo of elite weapons. Because, obviously some elite quarterbacks can do a lot with a little, and we've seen that in the past, but you look at the sustainable teams of the last 20 years outside of, again, offensive line, defensive line, that's the main thing next to quarterback. But Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, that was sustained. Like, that's really, outside of that, everything was always interchanging around them. Look at the Chiefs. It's that dynasty's really, it's at least on the field, on offense, it's Travis Kelce and it's Patrick Mahomes. I think that's so important. And as long as the Eagles have Hurts, Smith, and Brown, you're going to have a chance in pretty much any football game.
And teams continue to do this. Look at Justin Fields. It looks like that DJ Moore trade is going to pay off instantly. And football is an art, but at the same time, there is that science element to it. And if you don't think teams come to Philadelphia and see how much talent they have in these joint practices, like, I'm sure Shane Steichen knew what he was going to expect, but those young guys on Indianapolis, now they know where they have to get to. And Nick Saban always had this, he said this quote, let me think exactly how it was. It's like, you don't want to be at the top of the mountain. You want to be the mountain. And it seems right now like the Eagles are the formula and the mountain in the NFC. And like, if you want to get to where they are,
well, they finally did what these other teams were doing. There was years where Carson Wentz was throwing to Travis Fulgham. I was going to say, the Eagles didn't start this. They finally just caught up in this way, but now they're doing it better than almost anybody. I mean, it's them, it's the Bengals, it's the Dolphins, and I'd probably say the 49ers when it comes to just loads of weapons for a young quarterback. And this is how, again, you sustain success on top of elite line play. So that continued again today against the Colts. Gino, it was cool, though, on offense to see some different stuff, too, as well, though. There was a trick play where Kenneth Gainwell actually got a pitch in the backfield and then threw the ball to Grant Calcaterra. The Eagles last year did not really need to have a whole lot of trickery. You could even say the screen game really wasn't as involved. It wasn't as involved as it was in 2021. But it would be interesting to see a little more of that kind of stuff on offense this year, and I think you will. And I don't mean just see trick plays, but also pre-snap motion, screen plays, just that kind of more designed stuff before the snap.
Absolutely, and I've been pounding the table for that for years.
Just makes it harder to defend a team that doesn't even need to do that.
Look at Kansas City and look at Shanahan. I think the best thing about Shanahan is that, maybe he hasn't won a Super Bowl, but he's won a Super Bowl when it comes to creating an offensive game plan that other teams look to and try to copy. Like the Shanahan offense, man, if you can do what they do in the run game, as well as they do in the screen game, as well as they do in getting the ball downfield, if they had Jaylen Herz throwing the ball, Lou, I mean, that's unbelievable. And you have to kind of take some of those intricacies, the pre-snap motion, the ability to line up in different formations, much like Kansas City does as well. That stupid snow globe play where they're dancing around in a circle, but it just throws your defense off. And you always have to be able to be one step ahead of the opposition. And that's what the Eagles are going to be able to present this year. Dave Zingaro noted the other day in a single sentence in his write-up post-practice that the Eagles lined up in 21 personnel. I think you're going to see a lot of that this year where there's two running backs on the field. You're going to motion guys in and out of the backfield. Somebody is going to line up in the backfield, go to the slot. They might have both in the backfield, move both out to the slot and run it out of empty. I want to see that next evolution, Lou. They just can't keep doing what they were doing because it worked. That's what 2018 through 2020 was. We were 100%. Watching Mike Groh try to implement offensive concepts that they ran in 2017 that teams already had known how to defend.
Yeah, and again, don't throw away everything. I mean,
you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, but at the same time, you're right. Like, stay ahead of the curve and don't keep doing the same things. And it looks like in practice, they're trying out a bunch of different stuff. Gino, before we take a break, too, more fights continue at these joint practices today, and one was from Derek Barnett, of course, as always. I think this guy was a 90s hockey goon in a past life. He's involved every single time in these fights. But this time, I think it was on the other team. It was a late hit on Jalen Carter. Barnett comes to his defense. I'm starting to think, because everyone's always like hashtag it's always him. I'm starting to think Nick Sirianni or someone or many people in this Eagles organization kind of like the edge Barnett has. And I don't personally. I think he's a liability and gets penalties all the time. But I don't know, man. That might be part of why he sticks around, I'm starting to think.
Somebody in this front office had a love and affection for the Broad Street Bullies, and they're just like, here's Derek Barnett.
Right. But dude, Sirianni's an edgy guy, right? I mean, I kind of think he might like him a little more than I thought initially.
Well, they're giving him $3.5 million, Lou, and the thing is, if he plays that, that's a role in football. You definitely need that, but he has to do it within the guidelines of the sport, and that's the one thing.
Like
yes,
today,
he can do it now.
Cool.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Comes to the rookie's defense after he got, apparently it was Jalen Carter strip sacked Anthony Richardson. They didn't love the hit on Richardson. Barnett comes to his defense
last week.
Yeah. Well, and that happened at the end of practice, is why it got cut short. It was Zaire Franklin hit Kenneth Gainwell back-to-back plays late. Jason Kelsey comes out of nowhere, blindsides him in the second level, and I guess it had a all-field clearing brawl. Gino, I don't know. Some people are kind of saying they don't love these fights in practice. I like them. I think it's old school. I think you don't really get to do that on the field. It just brings another level, and I think it actually helps his team get fired up for the season. I don't know. That's just, I grew up a hockey guy, though, so that's probably part of it.
The thing about the fights is, if you look, Deion Sanders had a clip from Colorado practice last week. There was a fight that broke out, and he wasn't mad at the two kids that fought. There were a couple kids off to the side that didn't get involved, and he was like, you don't stand off to the side and leave your brothers on the side. And that's that brotherhood mentality. Like, that's the hockey thing, right? Like, you ride for your boys, and Jason Kelsey has always been a kind of for the boys type of guy, right? And I love that mentality, Lou, especially for a good team like this that knows that they're going to dominate you on the field, snap to snap to snap. And if you want to get upset and come at us, we'll take a 15-yard penalty and go forward, right?
It's a bold move starting stuff with Jason Kelsey. I don't know.
Not my cup of tea to pick a fight with.
Right, for sure. Gino, let's talk a little quarterback coming up next. Anthony Richardson in town. Some comparisons to Jalen Hurts have been made this offseason. Just want to do some overall philosophical quarterback talk with the way the Colts are handling him compared to what the Eagles have done with Jalen. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
But before we do that, we have a message from our friends over at GameTime. If you don't know what GameTime is by now, well, it's the perfect season to find out. If you've ever been like me and you've gone on a third-party site and bought tickets and you got scammed, you're probably thinking, man, I never want to go through that headache ever again. Well, ever since GameTime launched, and especially now that they're partnering with us, it's the only site that I use. They have killer deals with last-minute tickets with the best price guarantee, and you could stop stressing over tickets and just make sure you get there and make sure you get a great seat. They have flash deals and last-minute tickets, easy to find and buy tickets of every kind for every event in your area. They have images of the seat views, the exact view that you are going to see. If you want to sit up in the link, make sure you get a nice view of the All-22 like I do. I always check that out as well. Make sure you snag tickets without stress at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account using the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. It's football season. You want to get out to Lincoln Financial Field. I'm going to get down to Mile High here in Denver. It's beautiful out. I'm going to see some CU games. And how am I doing that? I'm going to GameTime. So make sure you download the app, use the code LOCKEDONNFL. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Shout out to our everydayers for making us your first listen Monday through Friday. You know, before we get into some quarterback talk, there was a tweet that pissed us both off, and I think we've hit punting rock bottom. What is this tweet about Aaron Sipos? The reason the Eagles might keep this guy is because Jake Elliott is comfortable with him as a holder on field goal attempts. Give me a break. That's when you know someone can't punt. If you're trying to convince yourself or that you have no other options, like, well, he holds the ball well. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, that drove me nuts.
I couldn't fall asleep till 2. I'm getting married in a couple days, and my mind's going crazy.
Gino's getting married this week, and he's getting mad about punters.
And I wake up to a tweet from Lou that says, "What is this?" And I read it. It's from Ed Kratz. I love Ed Kratz.
I got to keep you balanced this week, Gino. Can't be all good for you.
It's the yin and
You got
yang
the anniversary
life,
the 5-year anniversary yesterday, the wedding this week.
Got to check you. Can't eat all my cake too, right? But no, Ed tweets a similar quote to what Chip Kelly said about Riley Cooper being a great blocker, and that's why they have to keep him on the team. But as a wide receiver, you have to catch, and as a punter, you have to punt. And I'm not sure if anybody watched those games, but Tyler Zentler was holding for Jake Elliott the last 2 games.
That's the part I don't get either. Yeah.
And there are multiple guys out there, or multiple teams out there that have 2 punters right now. I think the leader in the clubhouse for me, our friend Ross Tucker over at Locked On Saints mentioned Lou Henley from the Saints is in a competition. He's probably going to be the odd man out, but he's been doing pretty well. He's been averaging, I think, around 45 yards per punt. He's had 12 punts in this preseason. There are a couple more guys. Cincinnati has one as well.
But there's got to be somebody out there that's
there was never competition for this guy in a year, Lou, where competition was everything.
And the guy they brought in, just again, as you said, it just has not been good enough. It's been a competition of who's been worse.
Exactly. And that's not what we want, because yesterday when we were talking about the 53 and saying we have hard decisions to make because there are so many good guys that we don't know who is the worst of this group, it is evident that Aaron Sipos is a bottom tier punter in the National Football League. And you made a great point coming off the back of Cam Johnston and Donnie Jones, years of magnificent punting where you didn't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
In the biggest spot last year, it ultimately cost you a football game. Yeah, the Jaylen Herz fumble happened. Yeah, your defense didn't get a stop. But the nail in the coffin was allowing that punt return in the Super Bowl. And Aaron Sipos, yeah, you could be a great holder, but your job is to punt the football. And they need to find somebody in the next 24 hours after that game. And Dave Spadaro, of all people, the guy who can make a rainy day look like the best day on earth, said that Mr. Sipos better watch out for his job.
Yeah, right. The Eagles mouthpiece for the organization is
the
saying
PR guy said he better figure it out.
The PR guy is saying look out for the point. Yeah, no, that's a red flag for sure for Sipos. He's got a big night ahead of him against Indy on Thursday. Gino, to keep talking about the Colts, I thought it was interesting. Anthony Richardson comes to town today and kind of look at where him and the Colts are at compared to, I mean, again, the Eagles look like they're on another level today. Jalen Hurts, the ball placement down the field and some of these throws to Smith and Brown, just absolutely unbelievable. And I think when Hurts came into the league versus Richardson, it's a different path, right? Richardson was a top 5 selection, seemed like he had all the upside in the world, one of the most talented arms you could ever see. Jalen, of course, had upside, but there were questions about his passing. He's a second-round pick that was designed to be a backup. But I do think Hurts actually helped the Colts convince themselves to take a chance on Richardson. I think when you see how Jalen has progressed in an unpredictable way, to a certain degree, like the trajectory he was on, most of the times quarterbacks don't become elite passers based on that path. And I think once teams saw what Hurts did, it made them, and of course, it's not just Jalen. You look at Josh Allen for this, and there's a lot of examples, but I think it really did convince teams even more to be like, let's take a chance on these upside kids that they might not be finished products, but we can get them to this certain, especially if they have mobility to the certain ceiling. And the fact that they brought in Shane Steichen, who coached Hurts magnificently last year, I think helped them even more. So I think Jalen is really, I think opened the league's eyes, and I think just based from an evaluation standpoint.
There are still the mentality of the football guy out there, like run it on 2nd and 10 after we don't complete a pass. But then there are those who want to expand and change the game. Those
that's the majority probably now. You know, when you look at the quarterback decisions of the last few years in these drafts.
And those guys, the general managers making those decisions, those are the guys hypothesis testing, right?
Yeah.
Drafting those quarterbacks and saying, can they work in the National Football League? And Josh Allen was one of them. Jalen Hurts was one of them. I think Justin Fields is going to be another one of them. And now you look at Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen, seeing what Jalen was over the last couple years. If he's evaluating that quarterback talent, he's probably thinking the same thing in mind. I need to find a guy who has everything mentally, has the athleticism, has the physical build, and I can mold. Because with Jalen, that's what it was, Lou, right? You were bringing this guy in 4 different offensive coordinators, 4 different play callers in college. He doesn't really have a set system that he's going to work in. You're going to bring him in and put him in your system because you believe all of those traits can transfer. And that's the next evolution of quarterback. And I've mentioned this a couple times of the fallacy of the idea that those pro-ready guys, the Nate Petermans of the world, who is so pro-ready coming out of Pittsburgh, is a better option moving forward than those guys who are true athletes and have a big arm. Yes, it might not be the most accurate, but can they expound on that with good coaching, with good weapons, with an offensive line? Yeah. And that's what Anthony Richardson, like I talked about in the first segment, that's the science that they're taking, right? They're taking the Chicago Bears formula, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Josh Allen Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, do you know, it's like a strong support system, and then you're more comfortable bringing in a more raw player coming out of the league with higher upside if you have that support system. I think that's also why I like the decision the Colts made about starting Anthony Richardson. And, you know, the to rest versus to play debate that goes on. I think every individual case is different. Like for Zach Wilson,
I think it's dead
on the bench.
I think it's dead though.
Right. But I will say for some instances, like Zach Wilson needed to be on the bench. Whereas like Trey Lance, his individual case, because he barely played football for 4 years, needed to be on the field. But for the majority of cases, I think these guys need to be on the field and learn. Because like Jaylen Hurts in 2021, he's never going to learn for 2022 what he needs to correct from a passing standpoint if he doesn't have those wake-up calls in the wild card round against Tampa Bay. So I think it's the right call, and especially when somebody has mobility like a Hurts or a Richardson, you don't have to be finished products right away. The way Steichen's going to design that offense this year, I think it's going to work. And like even Fields last year with the Bears, like was Fields a finished product? By no means at all. Their offense wasn't even close to being ready. And yet still in some of these games, they were keeping up with like that Cowboys game because of Fields' mobility and when they finally started trying to utilize that. So I always think it's fascinating to see like how these teams handle similar prospects in different ways or sometimes in the same way.
Josh Allen, you know I've been hard on him ever since he came out of Wyoming, and I've grown as I've matured, and his first 2 years put him in a position to be where he is today, because in the National Football League, all the greats will say it's wins and lessons. Does Josh understand what he has to become if he doesn't make all those mistakes his first 2 years? Does Jaylen Herz become that player if he doesn't go through all of that adversity at Alabama and Oklahoma and Philadelphia?
Again, it probably depends on the person, Gino, because then you could argue, though, that like somebody like Carson Wentz or somebody in a different... Yeah, like Carson Wentz probably, because he was on the field all the time and he had some success in ways that when he didn't fix things, he probably just that enhanced him to not fix stuff. It was like, well, I'm doing it this way and it's working. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's super interesting, and I think both the Eagles and the Colts are handling this the right way. The Eagles, I think, have the finished product already with Jaylen, and Richardson. It'll be interesting to see how he projects in 2023. Guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is sponsored by our partners over at eBay Motors. eBay Motors has teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Lyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit. Fantasy pick of the week, and Gino, it's Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Calvin Ridley. When it comes to value this year, Ridley's one of those guys. If you can get him in round 3 through 5, he's going to be the number one player in the passing game for Trevor Lawrence, who I think is going to take a massive, potentially MVP-like step in Doug Peterson's offense. So I think Calvin Ridley, and he hasn't played in a year, but I think you're going to remember pretty quickly why he was one of the best in the game.
Doug Peterson has done this before in Philadelphia with a young quarterback who gets one weapon and then they give him multiple weapons and he takes an exponential step. Trevor Lawrence is a exponentially better thrower of the football than Carson Wentz ever was. And I would say Calvin Ridley is probably a better receiver than the Eagles had on that 2017 team.
For sure.
He's an unbelievable route runner. His tires are fresh as ever. You don't think he's going to be running every single route at 110% after being off the football field. And I think in that offense with a guy like Christian Kirk, you're going to have a better offensive line, more weapons. They have a tight end that they could throw the ball to. Calvin Ridley is going to be open all over the field, and he might not even be the first receiver taken from that team.
Exactly. Vinny Lyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship in 2023. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it. eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank up the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you're going to know everything's set up for success from the get-go with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. eBay Motors, let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available in U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Gino, I want to wrap up the show talking about the rookie class. And we've done this a lot on the podcast, but I don't know, man. I mean, it's like more and more as each practice goes on, as each preseason game goes on, you hear about Jalen Carter making plays in practice. Sidney Brown today with the first team, he's getting increased first team looks at the safety position next to Reed Blankenship. Makes a big hit on a giant tight end in Mo Alley Cox, by the way, today to force a pass breakup that the refs had to talk to him about, which I think is great. Brown is just bringing the thump so far this summer. But it wasn't just that. I was watching today. This is what made me think of this. Nolan Smith's interview the other day about eating off the ground and how he's not satisfied with nearly getting sacks against the Browns and the Ravens these last two preseason games. And you see the maturity and just how pro-ready Sidney Brown has been, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Tyler Steen playing two positions a game as a rookie. I don't know, man. It seems like and Tanner McKee and Moro Ojomo have looked great. It just seems like this rookie class has that mental makeup that this core does. Like, I mean, talk about the perfect kind of guys Howie knew to bring in for this culture and just mirroring perfectly what this team's about. At least early on, that's what it seems like.
That's an excellent point. And now that you
they just seem like they've been on this team forever, right? Like it feels like they just fit in perfectly with Jalen and DeVonta. The personalities seem so similar.
And after a time where the mental makeup of a lot of the guys in the mid-2000s and those Super Bowl teams, I look at the Nelson Aguilars and the Carson Wentz, and then you go and draft a Jalen Reagor and then an Andre Dillard. Did those guys change how much they value the mental maturity of prospects coming out of college? Because it makes sense that you want guys that have gone through adversity and have grit and have the ability to want to get better, especially and just Philly, don't sit on their hands, right? And especially in Philly. And it's easy when these guys come from big schools or you draft a Canadian. You know how hungry Canadians are to just prove that they can play the American game. And you get guys that play multiple positions and guys that, by definition, Nolan Smith is undersized and Jalen Carter was underdrafted and Tyler Steen is a Bama guy. You don't think he wanted to come out as early as a guy like Evan Neal, right? All of these guys have something to prove still, in my opinion. They haven't proved anything yet, but the talk is that they're going to, and that's the promising thing, Lou. That's what I'm most excited about. I think you're excited about, the fans are excited about, because week one, when these guys are out there making plays right away, just take a step back and think. Usually when you go into a draft, you might get a 50% hit rate if you're great, right? Like that's pretty good. 30, 40 is pretty solid. But if you get 75 to 80% of these guys to be long-term pieces, and it seems right away that you have a sound investment with these guys if it continues the way that it's going, and if it comes from that mental maturity and that mental makeup that they just want to get better each and every day, well, if that's the standard you hold your quarterback to, who is player one, even, I mean, he's above a player, right? Like that's the mentality you have to instill in every single person. And that trickle-down effect is real. Look at post-2017 Eagles, man. Once your quarterback starts to wither a little bit, the cracks start to get a little loose.
Well, you make a great point, Gino. Yeah, about the them rethinking things from like a mental makeup standpoint. I think that is a big part of this. And I didn't even really think about it until the other day when I was hearing these interviews. Again, we've talked about it from an individual basis for each one of these guys, but then when you look at it collectively, it's like they're all wired so similarly.
Very.
And I think that's important. And this rookie class, it's going to be much more like 2021 than 2022. There's going to be barely any red shirts. I mean, these guys are going to be relied on like DeVonta Smith was from the get-go, like Landon Dickerson was. I think you're going to see a lot of Jalen Carter got increased first-team reps today next to Fletcher Cox. As I mentioned, Sidney Brown's been playing with Reed Blankenship on the first team. So have Terrell Edmonds and, Justin Evans, but I think Brown eventually will be that featured player there. Nolan Smith's going to be in this rotation heavily. Steen's going to be much more important this year than people think, probably. I think it's a really exciting rookie class from an on-field perspective, the way they're performing, but the way they talk and carry themselves too, and just how ready they are is super impressive. And I think that continued today in joint practices against the Colts. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Gino's going to take a nice 3-day break. He's got his wedding coming up this week, but I got you covered Wednesday through Friday, so make sure you subscribe on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. For Gino, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.